Two friends, Alan Dale and Jerry Carew, who grew up just a few streets apart in St. John's East End, have been separated by Canada's geography for 3 decades. They came together virtually during the pandemic to chat about like-minded interests. Alan lives in PEI and Jerry in Newfoundland. Thriving in remoteness has been a common theme for both of them during the pandemic. Gale Force Wins, the podcast is the result.
And welcome to Gale Force Wins. I'm Alan Dale, and with me, as always, my good buddy from the East End of St. John's, Newfoundland, Jerry Carew. How are you, Jerry?
Doing well. I'm excited about this one today. This is one of our charitable conversations. Going to put it out in early June. I actually did a business degree, Kevin, and I'm trying to remember. There was a legal course, a law course that I did within that curriculum, and there's only 2 words that I can remember: res ipsa loquitur and caveat emptor. I remember the definition of caveat emptor, but I remember res ipsa loquitur, and I had to look up what that meant. So that's the extent of my legal jargon. So I figured I'd throw that out at the beginning, and I look forward to learning about you and your organization.
Absolutely, Jerry. That's great. Listen, it does give us great pleasure here on Gale Force Wins to feature a nonprofit organization once a month. And I can't begin to tell you how excited Jerry and I are to introduce the Public Legal Information Association of Newfoundland and Labrador with the executive director, Mr. Kevin O'Shea. Kevin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks very much, Alan and Jerry. I guess, first of all, let me just say thank you for the opportunity to join the podcast. I'm excited to talk a bit about myself and our work here at Public Legal Information. I'm the executive director, as you said, of the Public Legal Information Association, or PLIAN for short. PLIAN is the acronym that we have.
I always like that acronym, PLIAN.
Yeah,
PLIAN.
So we get a lot of sometimes mispronunciations of it. We get a lot of plain, but PLIAN is pretty easy to remember once you know how it's pronounced. I sometimes find it hard to describe what my position is or my occupation. Probably the easiest is to say I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a practicing lawyer. I'm in this nonprofit role, and so I often say, I'm a nonprofit executive director. I'm an educator. I have past experience doing human rights work and human rights advocacy in different parts of the world. So a lot of different things. But right now my position is executive director of this organization. My background: I was born and raised in St. John's, around the center of St. John's, and I've gone away and come back several times during my life and during my career, but I've lived here back in St. John's for several years now and live right now in the Georgetown neighborhood of St. John's with my partner, Sarah, and our cat, Winston.
Kevin, what pulls you back to Newfoundland other than the Georgetown Bakery? What pulls you back to St. John's?
I've had opportunities to go away and learn a lot over the years, but I really enjoy, I've had interesting opportunities when I've come back and have enjoyed getting back into the community here. To live downtown is great. And the Georgetown neighborhood is wonderful to be in. Our office is downtown. We're on Water Street, so I can walk to work, walk back. That short commute is pretty nice compared to people in a lot of parts of the world. And I've been able to have pretty interesting experiences in my career here in the province that I don't think I'd be able to replicate in other places. So I really value those times I've had traveling for school or traveling for work. But, I think I'm in the right place in my career right now here in St. John's.
Tell me about your education. Where did you go away to school, and what kind of journeys did that take you on?
Well, I grew up in, like I said, the center of St. John's. So I went to St. Pius X and then Gonzaga High School right in central St. John's. But
I went to Brother Rice, so I won't hold that against you.
Okay. Brother Rice came over.
Alan went to Gonzaga. I went to Gonzaga.
There you go. Brother Rice joined with Gonzaga right my grade 11 year. They actually amalgamated the school. So I know that was a controversial time for Brother Rice to come over. Mm-hmm. I went away actually for my undergrad. And speaking of Gonzaga, I don't know if either one of you would have known Tom McGraw, who was the vice principal at Gonzaga, passed away a few years ago. But he was a really big mentor in my life and taught me, and then was the vice principal there. And he let me know in my grade 12 year, there was a scholarship that became available. Gonzaga was a Jesuit school, of course. And there was a Jesuit school down in the States, Holy Cross, in Worcester, Massachusetts, that started a new scholarship for a student from Newfoundland and Labrador to go to this school. And there was a connection. There was a alumnus of the school whose grandparents were both from Newfoundland. And him and his wife had traveled here over the years and really loved the province and loved seeing here. And they wanted to make a connection between Newfoundland and Holy Cross. So they started this scholarship. 2001 was the first time they launched it, and Tom McGraw was the connection, let me know about it. And I was lucky enough to get it and ended up down in the States for 4 years.
What's the name of this scholarship?
The Waylon O'Reilly Memorial Scholarship is the name of the grandparents of the donor, passed away a few years ago. But and actually they've offered it every couple of years since then. So we've had a number of students from the province, particularly St. Bon's, have gone down now to Holy Cross, and it's a nice connection to have with this great, very little college, less than 3,000 students in Worcester, Jesuit University down there.
Kevin, that's amazing. That's, Alan, this is why I love doing this. This is something that I knew nothing about. Right. And I mean, you're a Gonzaga alumnus yourself. Of course, I was Brother Rice, but still didn't know this. So thanks for telling us that.
Kevin, was that pretty pivotal moment for you going down to the States right out of high school? Worcester, very close to Boston, right? Not far?
Yeah, 45 minutes or so from Boston.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pivotal time. I mean, going away for university is always pretty pivotal, but in terms of world history, it was even more pivotal because I started school there 2 weeks before 9/11.
Oh, right.
And so, my mom drove down with my uncle and dropped me off and came home. And then we started class, and then 2 weeks later, 9/11 happens. And so that obviously changed everything going forward through my education. And I think the impact of that is still being felt today in a lot of ways. And studying political science at Holy Cross was my major. And so seeing through then the post 9/11 period, the Iraq War in 2003 started, was my third year there. And the 2004 election with John Kerry was the Democratic nominee. And we actually drove into Boston for the John Kerry victory rally that night, election night, late, and saw the speeches, and we're waiting for the results. But and of course Bush won that re-election. So that was a really interesting few years to be in the States, especially, and in that region of the States, and to see the impact of that. That happened. That event, of course, impacted everywhere around the world. But I think every time I've gone back to the States, it feels like the effect of 9/11 is still kind of being processed and felt there. And, we still see it today with all the political developments and things that have happened since then.
Kevin, I mean, studying political science, 2 weeks into a political science degree in the United States at that particular moment in American history, that is fascinating.
I mean, it was scary and pretty jarring, but then as you go through the courses and you're studying it over those years, you realize you're kind of studying history changing every day. The textbooks kind of need to be keeping updated with what's happening.
So after
it's an interesting time.
After Worcester, where did you head?
I spent a year actually the other part of the States in Arizona, the other corner of the States in the Southwest in Phoenix, Arizona. So again, the Jesuits have been an influence on my life throughout most of my life. So there was a volunteer program called the Jesuit Volunteer Corps that they took, university graduates, and they spent a year doing volunteer work in different parts of the States, or actually internationally as well. Some people went international. So I was placed in Phoenix, Arizona at a school called Brophy Prep that is actually a pretty wealthy private school, but I was teaching, doing a little bit of teaching, but also bringing the students. Most of them were really wealthy kids. Wayne Gretzky's kid was there when I was teaching there. You know, John McCain's kids had gone there.
Wow.
And trying to bring them and educate them on social justice issues and, you know, kind of showing them different parts of life that they normally wouldn't see in Scottsdale or the richer parts of Phoenix. Bringing them across the border to Mexico to kind of live and work with people for a little bit of time and be exposed to, you know, different parts of life and people in different experiences than they were. So that was quite an interesting year I had in Arizona and living in Phoenix for a year.
Kevin, the lens that you must have brought as a Canadian, but more specifically as a Newfoundlander from downtown St. John's, a completely different world from where you were. Your lens must have been foreign to them for sure.
Well, they couldn't understand why I was so excited to meet Wayne Gretzky. Like to them, you know, hockey is by far the fourth most popular sport, or probably even less than that in Arizona. But Gretzky came to this fundraiser breakfast they had, and they had so many celebrities and people they knew at this school, pretty wealthy connections. But I was so excited to be at this, you know, to meet Wayne Gretzky, and they set it up so that I could. So that was kind of a neat experience.
That's fantastic.
You know what, Alan, I was excited about this podcast prior to, but I don't know if I don't talk about it much, but Wayne Gretzky is probably of the sports celebrities. He's my idol. You know, you couldn't watch hockey and not like Wayne Gretzky, no matter what. So that's pretty cool. We won't get into all of that because we got some other things on our agenda today, but some other day we'll talk about that.
I had the pleasure to see Wayne Gretzky play a couple of times in Montreal when I was doing some work up there. I mean, it was something fascinating about Wayne Gretzky. Wherever the puck was, he was there. It just seemed to be unbelievable. So after Scottsdale, where was next?
Well, then I was wondering what I was going to do, and I started looking at grad schools and you know, we're looking to come back to Canada, and really didn't have law school in mind. I thought I'd continue with political science and had a real interest in international affairs and international relations. I mean, at that time, there was so much happening with the Afghanistan war and Iraq war and a lot of developments in terms of international relations. So it was an interesting piece of what I had studied at Holy Cross with political science. So that's where my mindset was. But I started looking around at different programs, and you know, there was a program that was interesting at Ottawa, between the University of Ottawa and Carleton University, a joint master's in international affairs and law degree. And I thought, well, I'm not sure I'm that interested in law, but why not? I'll go for it and see what happens. And applied for the programs. I was accepted into law school and turned down from the master's program. Okay. So, you know, it's funny how things happen. What you're accepted to or what doesn't work out, and it sets you on different paths. And I thought, well, I'll go to law school and maybe I'll reapply for this master's program and see what happens. But ended up in the law school track and decided not to go with the master's, and you know, ended up at University of Ottawa doing my law degree. So, and that's kind of led me obviously down this path since then to really leading to where I am today.
So you're a couple of years in Ottawa doing that. You're still not back to Newfoundland. Where was next for you?
Then I came back to Newfoundland after so looking at where I'm going to article, and ended up interviewing with the Department of Justice here in the province. And again, kind of how fate works out, I was interested in more civil litigation and working out of the Confederation building, doing you know, kind of more policy oriented stuff. But the interviews, they interviewed for both the criminal side of the program and the civil litigation side of the program at the same time. And what I was accepted to, or the job I was offered, was with the Crown Attorney's Office in St. John's, doing criminal prosecution. And decided to say yes to that. And, you know, that again takes you down a different path. So I ended up in Atlantic Place in St. John's, you know, doing articling and taking the bar exam, but working in the Crown Attorney's Office as a prosecutor for a year there.
How was that experience?
It was, I say to a lot of young lawyers or people going to law school now, and they ask, what should I do? Where should I look for jobs? And I always say to them, if you have any interest in litigation, if you have any interest in going into court and being comfortable doing so, there's no better education for that or experience builder than that than the Crown's office or legal aid. Because I was in court every day as an articling student, and you get really comfortable quickly with thinking on your feet, with being in front of a judge, with questioning witnesses and carrying a case and negotiating with the other side around sentences and all the things you need to do with carrying a criminal case. So it was a real kind of trial by fire you get thrown in the deep end pretty quickly, but you learn so quickly. And it was a great experience. I articled there. I ended up coming back to the Crown's office for a couple of years. And, it wasn't the long-term career for me, but I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity, learned a lot from the people I worked with, from other lawyers in the city and from judges as well. And, you just become comfortable on a different level with public speaking and thinking on your feet and talking after having all of those experiences being in court.
These are amazing foundational blocks that you're building and that you're explaining to us here. What I really find fascinating, Kevin, is that as the wind changes directions for you, you just seem to go with that and say, okay, well, let's see where life takes me. Was there anything in your mind that says, no, I'm not doing that, and you get your back up and say, I'm not going to try it? Or do you just say, yeah, okay, let's go into this open-minded and see where it goes?
I mean, I've certainly tried to embrace and say yes to the opportunities that come my way. And if I'm, it's a couple of those experiences that I mentioned where I'm turned down from something but offered something else, it's, I think the door is opening and that you didn't necessarily expect, but try to at least give it a shot and see how it goes. And it's usually turned out pretty well. I mean, I knew I wasn't all that interested in private practice. Mm-hmm. And didn't have a lot of experience. You do a rotation as part of the bar course, but I haven't really had much experience with private practice, but I knew it really wasn't all that for me. And something I haven't really got into or tried, but other parts of the legal practice, like I said, being in court was a great experience. And I've been able to kind of shift that to what I do now, where I have one foot still in the law, but I'm not a practicing lawyer. I'm doing the education side of things and, connecting with the public on how they encounter the law. So I get to have it a bit of the best of both worlds, where I'm doing a lot of different things and still connected to the law.
It's a wonderful skill to be able to understand that when something closes, something always opens again. There's always another opportunity. I know when I was younger, I never thought that way. I just thought, oh my God, everything is closed. It's going to stop. Nothing's going to happen. Of course, as you get older, you obviously realize that when something shuts down in front of you, there's many, many other opportunities. And to have that so early is great. That's great that you were able to have that. We talked before we came on about travel and things like that. Tell us about some of those adventures.
Well, again, trying to say yes to things that came along my way. So, in the middle of law school, I spent a summer over in Cambodia working for an NGO and I'm doing legal education now. And this was a job in after my first year of law school, working in legal education. So working with an international NGO, creating lessons for kids and for other people in Cambodia about legal rights and legal options that they have. It's funny. It's very similar to what I do for people in Newfoundland and Labrador now with public legal information. So that was a pretty eye-opening experience. And then again, after my bar course, after I did the articling year with the Crown's office, I had a chance to do an internship with the Canadian Bar Association. Runs this program to send young lawyers different parts of the world and to work with nonprofits in developing countries all over the world. So I ended up in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, for a little under a year and working with a human rights advocacy organization in Dar. and living and working with them for some time. And it was a fascinating experience. I thought about it a lot as my career has gone on, and the impact that had. I think the more, distance I have from it and the more I've reflected on it, what I've realized is that, the value of those experiences, it wasn't so much me contributing to those organizations. I mean, I don't speak Swahili. I was a young lawyer, I was basically cheap labor for these organizations. I went and did, research and writing and some editing in English and things like that. But the value is that I've been able to take back so much from those places and have the perspective of working in these very different environments in a legal context or a human rights context, and to see what the reality is in Cambodia, in Tanzania, that we're really developing as democracies and in terms of human rights. And it certainly makes you never take for granted the rule of law or the freedoms that we have, the human rights that we have here in Canada, the democratic rights that we have. It also makes you realize, and I've followed those countries over the years after I've come home, and it's, Tanzania, I was there in 2010, 2011, and they were pretty well, doing pretty well in terms of democratic rights, human rights, kind of lauded in East Africa, in that region, as being ahead of most of the other countries in that area. Yet there were still problems. I mean, I worked on the human rights report for Tanzania with my colleagues at the organization, and there was some serious concerns with arbitrary arrest of opposition leaders and human rights advocates, of state-sanctioned violence, extrajudicial killings that weren't really investigated properly. So there was concerning things happening, and then there was an election that happened that year. I helped observe the 2010 presidential election in Tanzania, and all the international observers said, well, this is a free and fair election. We're giving our stamp of approval to it. But we would receive reports from around the country about violence against opposition politicians, violence at polling places, ballot boxes being tampered with and stolen, and things that were pretty eye-opening. But yet, I think compared to other places, it was fair enough to get the stamp of approval from the observers. And what I've seen since then, and watching Tanzania, it's actually really eroded, unfortunately, in recent years. And there's been more violence, more authoritarian impulses from the leadership. And I think it just goes to show these rights that we have, the rule of law, our democratic rights, they can backslide. They can start to go away, and it can happen pretty quickly. So we certainly shouldn't take it for granted here in Canada or Newfoundland and Labrador. You only need to look to our southern neighbors, to a place where I lived for a few years, the States, to see how quickly that could start to change and to backslide again. So it was an interesting perspective to have, and like I said, it's influenced much of the work I've done since then, and has really given me an important perspective on some of those issues.
Yeah, Kevin, I just want to jump in there. Democracy is so fragile, and we don't realize it. As you said, when everything happened on January 6th in the United States, it's really an uncomfortable thing. And listen to you talk about this, it just brings it back. And there was an incident, I believe, a couple of days ago, a Ryanair plane was diverted to Minsk. Did you see that? A so-called dissident on board. But that one is alarming because they diverted the plane out of midair. So,
it's something that probably would be, for Europe, would be unthinkable a few years ago. And not that Belarus was ever, the gold standard for democratic rights, but I think there was hope that it would become, post-Soviet country would become, more a part of Europe and more free. And obviously that leader there is trying to crack down and cement his authority. But the fact that that's happening in Europe is pretty unthinkable. With I've flown on Ryanair before around Europe, when I spent some time over there, and it's pretty scary to see it happen.
Yeah, it really is, right, and it can happen quick. And I mean, Yugoslavia was another great example of just how quick things can happen. And it's good that there's people like you to pay attention. Kevin, it's one thing to read about these countries and these challenges, or watch them on TV or research them on the internet. It's very much a different thing to touch and feel it like you have, and it burns in your soul, and it kind of makes you want to make things better, and it changes you a little bit. Would you have said that those experiences changed you when you came back, made you who you are?
Absolutely. And you can't replicate it by reading about it, or, watching a documentary about it, or, to be in Cambodia and to go through the killing fields and the Tuol Sleng Museum, where thousands and thousands of people were tortured and killed, and to speak to people who lived through the genocide in the 70s is so much different from, watching that movie, The Killing Fields, or watching a documentary about the Cambodian genocide. So, I thought about it a lot actually in the last year with COVID-19 and being, all we're doing is Zoom meetings and Zoom conferences and all that kind of thing. And I think it's helpful. And obviously we needed to do it in this past year, but I don't think anything replicates the experience of going to a community and speaking to people face to face, and actually finding out what life is like in that place, and to connect with people in person is, I don't think we can just substitute that with the Zoom calls and, other technology, as useful as they might be. And I've seen it with my time here at Public Legal Information, PLIAN. I've been able to travel to every corner of the province, and much more than I had in any other part of my life, and to really connect with people in each community and see what are the legal issues, where are the access to justice needs in this part of the province. Right. And you just always get a different perspective and a better understanding of what's happening on the ground when you actually go to the place, fly to it, talk to people in person. You really can't replicate it.
Kevin, let's explore that a little bit. A guy grew up center of St. John's. Now, anything west of Gonzaga would have been out around the bay to you growing up. So tell me a little bit about your travels through Newfoundland and some of the experiences there.
Well, I really didn't have extensive experience traveling or in a lot of parts of the province, and in particular Labrador, until I joined PLIAN and took this job in 2014. And for a long time, a big part of the work we do here is going out to communities, giving plain language legal presentations to schools, to seniors groups, to community organizations, and trying to help explain the law and different common legal issues to people in a way that the average person can understand, can know what their rights are, can know what their legal options are. And we can do some of that by distance. We can do some of it by phone, by now more webinars and Facebook Lives and Zooms and things like that. But it's been a really important part of the work we do here to get out to the communities directly and to offer presentations and increasingly offer legal clinics to people, try to bring lawyers in to meet with people directly. So it's been a great experience. It's one of the most enjoyable parts of my job, of this position, is to actually do that, to go out to the Northern Peninsula, to go to Conn River and the Harbour Breton region on the South Coast, and to travel all around Labrador to Happy Valley Goose Bay, to Port Hope Simpson, to Nain and Hopedale and Nawashish, and come in and do a legal clinic or do a presentation, and then just have a chance to talk to people and find out, well, what is the reality when it comes to going to court here, or trying to get in touch with a lawyer, or trying to deal with a family law matter or a criminal matter, or any of the legal things. And again, it's that taking for granted piece. I think we take for granted a lot of the access that we have here in St. John's, because you come downtown and then there's, you throw a rock and you hit a lawyer on Duckworth Street or Water Street, but that's not the reality in most parts of the province. Even not that far outside St. John's, and it even becomes more of a barrier, more inaccessible in Labrador, where there's very few private practicing lawyers at all.
Kevin, you bring to mind the thought that the discussion around healthcare is always top of mind. Now that we're talking to you here today, you realize that there's a lot more than just healthcare, access to legal information. And you think about the geography of Newfoundland, like you said, I've traveled extensively. This is a big province. To visit every nook and cranny takes more than a week. So access to legal information and lawyers, I guess, is incredibly important.
Well, access to justice has really become the key phrase that we use. And it's
okay.
I came along in 2014 to this position. Just before then, there was a big report released by a National Committee on Access to Justice. Justice Cromwell formerly was on the Supreme Court from Nova Scotia. He chaired that committee, and it was really focused especially on civil and family law matters. So when we think of the legal system, most of the time people think of criminal matters, because that's what's reported in the media. That's what gets the most attention, high profile cases and arrests and big trials. Right. But for most people, the encounters they're going to have with the legal system isn't really nothing to do with criminal law. It's going through a divorce or a separation. It's making your will and dealing with your estate, dealing with your parents' estate or grandparents' estate. It's buying a house. It's dealing with a rental situation, trouble with your landlord. All those things, a lot of us in the access to justice world refer to them as everyday legal problems.
Right.
And that's what most people are going to encounter. And it's where there is, I think, a serious crisis with access to finding lawyers to help, finding legal advice, and for people to understand what they should do. I mean, what rights do they have? How do they resolve these disputes without it costing them an arm and a leg or getting caught up in a court case for years and years with something that could have been resolved much, much easier before?
Kevin, absolutely. So I guess the question is, who found who here? Did you find public legal information, or did they find you? And because it seems like a good fit. So how did this happen?
It was another one of those opportunities that came along at the right time in my life. And I think just, like I said, the door that opened, it happened to be the right time. I had left the Crown's office and I decided to do a master's degree. And again, my interest in international affairs took over. So I had a chance to do a master's in law in international criminal law at a school in Turin, Italy, or Torino, the Italians would say. So University of Turin, and then it was a joint program with a UN agency on international criminal law based in Torino. So I was over there for about 8 months in 2013 and had a great experience, of course, living in Italy, and came home and didn't know what I was going to do. Thought about going back to the Crown's office, was looking at opportunities all over the place. And a friend of my family's who had been the former executive director at PLIAN, and I was talking to her at a party, and she said, this is a great job. I think they're looking for a new executive director soon. And the opportunity came up to apply for it, and the rest is history. So it was another one of those times. It's the right opportunity, the right time in my life came along, and it's been a great experience to be here.
Right opportunity, the right time, but also a willingness to try, right? There's that piece of the equation too. So tell us about the organization.
Well, it's been around for a while, actually. It was formed in 1984, and it's part of what's commonly referred to as the PLIA world. So public legal education and information. And there's similar organizations all over the country, and at least one in every province. And the goal really is to provide general information for the average citizen, particularly someone who's self-representing in court and doesn't have access to a lawyer or isn't represented by a lawyer, but is trying to navigate through the legal world on their own. And then the other side of it, I think the education side of it is the more proactive. If we can educate people about their rights in advance, even if they don't have an ongoing issue or an ongoing problem, but they know, okay, this is what law might apply to me. This is what some of these different courts or tribunals are. This is where I can go to find help, and hopefully, head off any disputes they might have down the road or any problems they might have down the road. So that's kind of the two components. So we offer a lot of different services and projects with that idea in mind and with the mandate of, can we increase access to justice for people in the province? We run the province's only lawyer referral service. So we connect people who want to talk to a lawyer, who want to consult with a lawyer and get some advice, a half-hour consultation at a reduced cost. So we have lawyers all over the province who sign up with us to do that. As I said, we go out and do presentations in the community on all sorts of legal issues like wills and estates planning, family law, residential tenancies issues. And we write publications. We create different documents, might be a small pamphlet, it might be a big booklet, and we have them printed. We have them electronically available on our website as well. And something we're really trying to get to do more of, and recognizing, I think, our newcomer population in the province and our Indigenous populations, is get them translated into as many different languages as possible. So we just actually completed some translation of a booklet on child protection issues into the two dialects of Inuaman and Nuttutut. We're trying to get a lot of as many publications as possible translated into French, and then newly, some publications into Arabic, Tagalog, Mandarin Chinese. So reflecting, and we have a growing population of newcomers to the country living here in the province who certainly we want to help them understand what their legal rights and legal options are as well.
How far does the outreach go? Like, do you go into the school systems, and at what grade levels are you in?
Well, before COVID, we were going into the schools quite a bit, and we would certainly, high school students were a big focus. Also, the colleges and MUN as well. We try to connect with, but I think I presented to as young as maybe grade 4 on things like we talked about bullying, and kind of that word's getting a little bit out of fashion, but the consequences of bullying and what rights do you have if you're experiencing some of these issues. So we talk about that with really young kids, but then get more into the legal system and what a trial looks like, and what happens in court with some of the older kids. One of the programs that we've run over the years that I really enjoyed, we're going to try and revive it again this summer, is youth justice camps. So every summer, take kids aged about 12 to 15 and have a camp for 3 or 4 days during the summer. Bring in a lot of different people with some connection to the legal system. So lawyers, probation officers, correctional officers, police officers sometimes too, and talk about how they got into the legal world and what their jobs are. And then we also have the kids carry out a mock trial. So prepare, a trial. Some are the prosecutors, some are the defense, some are the witnesses, and they actually perform it in St. John's. We have them do it at Supreme Court. In courtroom number 1, the big courtroom with a real judge overhearing the case. So that's a pretty fun thing to see, and to have the kids, get a case on day 1, and 2 days later they're acting it out in Supreme Court with a Supreme Court judge hearing it, and then seeing the light bulb go off in some of those kids' heads and thinking, I might want to do this. I might want to be a defense lawyer. I might want to be a Crown prosecutor down the road, or a lawyer. So that's a really fun part of what we do.
It goes back to your experiences too, right? It's the experiential learning that sticks with you. And I'm sure those kids are the ones that have gone through it, remember it well. What other programs does PLIAN offer?
Well, a couple of big projects that I'd want to highlight. And I guess I'll say that over the past few years, we started to expand our view of what is connected to the law and what relates to access to justice and legal rights and the types of groups we're working with. So we started working with a lot of other nonprofits and community organizations in St. John's and other parts of the province. So probably 5 or 6 years ago, we started working very closely with the Sexual Assault Crisis and Prevention Center. We recognized pretty quickly that they're serving people who've experienced sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment. Those people obviously have often legal questions, want to know about what legal options they might have. And we were, encountering people with legal questions who sometimes were survivors of violence. So there was a natural overlap there in what our two organizations were doing. And so we started getting to talking and thinking about what we could do in partnership, and some funding opportunities came up. And we launched what's called the Journey Project, which has a lot of different components, but the basic idea is to increase support for survivors of sexual violence in the legal system. What we started off doing was developing some training for lawyers, court staff, police officers about sexual violence and about the impact of trauma on a person who's experienced sexual violence, and some strategies then for if you're working with that person or encountering them within the legal system. So we've been carrying that out for several years. And then about 3 years ago now, we launched what's called the Sexual Violence Legal Support Service, which is direct support for people who've experienced any type of sexual violence. And this is a partnership with the provincial government, with the Department of Justice and the federal government to provide them free legal advice. So we have a roster of lawyers from around the province. We can connect those survivors with lawyers, but we also have a team here that are able to provide ongoing support to those people, help them just walk through what their options are, and also connect them to resources. So maybe it's a lawyer, but maybe it's nothing to do with law. Maybe they just want some referrals on counseling or other supports on housing, on other issues they might be encountering. So that's been a really big project over the past few years. And I think, a really successful and needed project is, from what I've seen, to help support people who've experienced sexual violence.
Kevin, I just think, Alan, what you've taken on is enormous. I've done a lot in the private sector, and it wasn't until I joined the YMCA and a gentleman who left the private sector to become a CEO in Montreal said to me, he said, Jerry, the challenge of a nonprofit is so much greater. If you're just chasing the profit motive, that's one thing. To listen to you talk about what you're trying to do, it's kudos to you for what you're doing. Hey, Alan.
Well, 100%. I have a question, and maybe they're one, maybe they're not. Where does PLIAN and public legal aid come in, or are they one and the same? Is that a fair question?
That's the same question I have. And I'm sure many have. Hey, yeah. Kevin.
It's a good question, because I think it does lead to some confusion because the names are a bit similar, but yeah, we're independent of each other.
Right.
But now that being said, we work very closely with legal aid, certainly promote legal aid, and they would refer people to us, and we would refer people to them. But no, we're completely independent of government and of the courts and legal aid, but work with all those stakeholders. Right. We all sit on a committee called the Access to Justice Steering Committee for the province, okay, and which we chair currently. But that brings, Legal Aid Commission, judges, Department of Justice, the Law Society together, and a lot of other groups. And we try to discuss these issues and see, well, what can we do to improve access for the people of the province and work on some of these challenges. So that's been an interesting part of what we do as well.
Kevin, how many on your team, and where do they, and what are their backgrounds?
Well, we've grown. So I joined 2014 and was an office of 3. And since then, we're now up to 9 in the office, and we're adding a summer student in a couple of weeks. So we'll be a team of 10. And we have the St. John's office. So we have 8 of us here right now. And we actually launched our office in Labrador last year, right in the middle of the pandemic, actually. But that was kind of an ongoing project too, to recognize we can't deliver services to people in Labrador just from St. John's and swooping in every now and then to these communities. We really need to have a base on the ground. So we have one staff there now. Hopefully that'll expand in the future, but we have an office in Goose Bay. But, people come, a lot of different backgrounds. We have actually a few social workers working with us now. We have two people like me who are trained as lawyers, but aren't practicing lawyers at the moment. We have a really great team. And so I was lucky to inherit some really great team members and then add a number of really great team members over the years too. I'll highlight, we actually have one of our staff members, Kelly, our office manager. Just a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated her 20th anniversary of starting work with PLIAN. Wow. You want to ask how do we achieve success in the nonprofit sector, or probably any sector? But from the nonprofit point of view, you need to have a team mentality and a staff that works well together and is dedicated to the mission of the organization. And I'll point to that person, Kelly Brockerville, as she exemplifies that spirit, because she's done it all here. She's answered inquiries from the public. She's overseen the books for many years, overseen projects, keeps us all in line. And we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing without that sort of dedication and commitment to the mission of the organization. So I'm really lucky. It makes my job a lot easier to have a team that's so dedicated and really likes what they do. And then I think the other side of success with a nonprofit is you need the governance side to be effective too. So a really good board of directors. And I have to shout out Jerry, Bruce Chislett, our chair, who I know you know, and having a board that's, again, dedicated to the mission and understands their responsibility to the fiduciary responsibility to the organization to look at the big picture and the overall direction and financial health of what we do, but also at the same time, not necessarily micromanaging or getting in trusting us to do the day-to-day operations. And so I'm lucky to have a great staff and a great board that understands that balance. And that makes being a manager or being an executive director a lot easier.
Kevin, it's interesting. Yes, I know, Bruce. And I mean, when you think of the people that volunteer, especially if they have their own private business, private practice, it's not easy. I'm a capitalist at heart, and I hear people criticizing the capitalistic system. And my point to them is, well, show me another system that's better. I feel confident in talking about the capitalistic system. When it comes to justice, however, I think I'm here with an expert now. If someone was to criticize the justice system, and frankly, I heard someone on the news the other day criticizing it, what would you say to that person about being critical of our justice system as it is right now?
Well, I'll be the first to say there's a lot of challenges within our justice system, and there's a lot we can do better. I actually think there's great opportunity for improvement, but I can also see where there has been improvement made over the years. Right. And I know a lot of the focus has been on sexual assault cases. I mean, there's been some pretty high profile cases here recently, and some not unfounded criticism of how the justice system has dealt with those issues. I think the criminal system that we have, the basic rules are there for a reason around proof beyond a reasonable doubt, around the burden being on the Crown to prove that case, because the criminal system, the state wields such immense power to take away a person's freedom, to put them in jail, to punish them. And we need to be really careful in how we wield that power. And that's why we have those protections in place around a fair trial, around access to legal assistance, and to that high burden, which I know people find struggles with around that proof beyond a reasonable doubt can seem like a really high bar, but I think it's there for a reason. Now, are there things we can do within that system to better support people who experience crime, to, I think, probably better deal with people who commit crimes? Absolutely. There's always changes that can be made and reforms, but I'm not sure to wipe away that whole system altogether and to build from scratch. I'm not sure what we would do, what that would look like.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say though, Jerry, is I think there's also alternative paths that can run parallel to our system that we could probably explore a little more and develop, that maybe don't work for everyone, but could work for some people in the right circumstances. And so we've worked a lot with a group that advocates for restorative justice and has focused on it in terms of the education system, but is really looking to promote it in the legal system as well. And that's a series of practices and really a approach to the legal system that focuses on, okay, when there's a crime that's happened, there's damage that's been done to a victim, there's damage that's been done to the community, and there's obviously something that's gone on with this perpetrator, so the person who's committed this crime. So how can we look to address those root causes and try to heal some of those relationships that have been damaged? And it puts a lot of power in the hands of a victim, and tries to emphasize that community perspective. And I don't know if it works. It may not be appropriate in every circumstance, and there's a lot of reasons behind that, but I think that's an opportunity to develop something that won't replace the criminal justice system, but can be bring some cases. And I think we could do some more work on building that up.
And of course, Kevin, as the country and the province looks different over time with newcomers and a better understanding of our relationship with our First Nations people, I'm assuming the criminal justice system evolves alongside that.
It has to. I mean, if it doesn't, then it's not doing its job. And a key principle in the criminal system or the justice system in general is there public confidence in the administration of justice, is a phrase you hear quite a bit. So this goes back to some of the experiences I had observing in Cambodia and Tanzania. The rule of law is fundamental to everything we do, to the freedoms that we have, to the democratic society that we have. I mean, there needs to always be the rule of law, but there needs to be buy-in to that. And so there needs to be evolution in how the justice system responds to situations. And if there's a loss of trust in that system, then that is one of those things that might start to erode the rule of law, and it would be really concerning, I think. I think with Indigenous communities, there's a lot of work to be done to better respond to the needs and address the harms from the past, and the ongoing harms with those communities. And I think to build versions of the system or alternatives to the criminal system that are based in those Indigenous communities and are based on their traditions. And there's a lot of legal traditions in those communities that are already there. So it's not necessarily building from scratch.
Exactly.
And that's, you asked, we were talking earlier about what keeps me up at night. From an access to justice perspective, I think in particular our Indigenous communities and governments in Newfoundland and Labrador and other parts of Canada there's so many barriers to accessing justice. And I think that's where we have a lot of work to do in the next few years on addressing some of those issues.
And I would argue we have a lot to learn from those cultures. As you say, there's been legal systems in place long before we got here, and we have a lot to learn from that, I would assume.
Absolutely. I mean, we assume sometimes that the common law, British tradition is the only game in town, but there's a lot of other legal systems and legal traditions that have been in place in this part of the world and in other parts of the world for a long time. So there's a lot of other traditions we can draw from and learn from.
So you're back home now, Kevin. You're back home in the center of St. John's again. What's on the horizon for you? What's next?
Well, I think, COVID has shaken everything up, and it's obviously affected us quite a bit here at PLIAN over the last year. I found it challenging to not be able to get out on the road again and to travel and to go to other parts. I mean, traveling around the world as well in other parts of Canada, but not to do some of our normal activities. So I'm really looking forward to hopefully this summer, more of us being vaccinated and being able to put COVID behind us to a certain extent, and then dealing with the challenges from COVID. I mean, I think the aftermath of this pandemic is where we haven't even really started to understand it, and we're going to be feeling the effects for many years, and in all industries, in all sectors, nonprofit industry, in the legal world, and the justice system. We don't really know yet, I think, how this is going to impact us all. And I think it's going to present new challenges around access to justice. As we've been talking about, there's a lot of ongoing issues we need to keep working on. So I'm really looking forward to us continuing to grow and trying to continue meeting the needs of the legal needs of people in the province, and to get back out there and connect with people directly and see what we can do to help.
So, Kevin, we always ask our guests to leave the audience with one small takeaway. And in this particular case, I guess one small takeaway, and maybe even what is that one thing we should know about PLIAN as we leave this conversation. So 2 things I guess I'm asking for. What's your one piece of advice to the audience from a guy that's done a lot of things, seen a lot of things, has participated in a lot of things? What would your advice be? And finally, what is that one thing we should know about PLIAN?
Well, I guess I'll say from a personal perspective is to say yes to opportunities that come your way, and you don't know where things are going to lead. So be adventurous and like I said, say yes to when those doors open. From the PLIAN perspective, I'll leave it as a point of advice, but something people should know about us as well. I can't encourage people enough to be proactive when it comes to these everyday legal issues. And it's so much better to address them earlier on than let them fester and have to deal with them later. And, whether it's wills and estates matters, legal planning, family law issues, housing issues, deal with them early and get some advice and get some help. And that is something that PLIAN does, whether it's our publications or presentations, or to come just call us up or email us and talk to one of our staff, get connected to a lawyer, and find out what options that you have and what rights you have to try and deal with some of these things. That's my word of encouragement to people, and it's obviously something that we promote here at PLIAN.
As they say, a stitch in time saves 9, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So, Jerry, incredible conversation today. What are your final thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. I tend not to say a lot when we're doing these Gale Force Winds. We listen. That's one of the things. And I take notes. I love taking notes. You probably can't see it, but I've got a lot here. You've really made me think, Kevin. I can't think more about capitalism, democracy, behavioral norms, bullying, but access to justice. Alan and I are absolutely driven by the entrepreneurial endeavors, primarily of tech entrepreneurs. Having you on is a breath of fresh air, not to negate any of the guests that we've had on, but, access to justice is so important so that we can pursue those capitalistic ideals. So I would just say, you, to me, have epitomized. You have the lawyer background, but you also have the organizational skills to bring this association to a higher level. So kudos for that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what another wonderful episode of Gale Force Winds. To learn about the Public Legal Information Association of Newfoundland and Labrador and speak to their executive director, Kevin O'Shea. Kevin talked about the PLIAN having a great board, great staff, great mission, but all that doesn't happen without a great leader. So, Kevin, thanks very much for what you do for the organization, for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I'm going to give one piece of advice, and that is the world needs more guys like Kevin O'Shea. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Winds. That's Gale Force Winds, WINS.com.